introduce our guest for our hashtag Why Get a Mentor podcast today. Her name is Andrea Butcher. Andrea is the president of the HRD Advisory Group. She is a visionary business leader with extensive experience as a talent management professional, focusing on the growth and development of individuals, work teams, and leaders. We are here to talk about mentors and how mentors helped us get to where we're at today, help us get to where we're going, and ultimately how we can just be better professionals at work and how mentors helped us get there. So first off, I'd love to ask, how have mentors helped you get to where you're at today?
Oh my gosh, that's such a big question, Garrett, right out of the gate. I attribute, and I always tell this story, I attribute so much of where I am today and my early progression very quickly in my career to a guy named Ken Jokum. Ken was the vice president of human resources for an organization called Premier Farnell. It was my first job out of graduate school. And so here I was, 22 years old, like full of ambition and drive, but I had no experience. And so I needed someone to help fill in the gaps for me. So I'm in Ken's office, like early in his time with the company, so excited about the potential. So I had a graduate degree in human resource development. And at this organization, so I'd been there for about a year and a half, and I noticed that there was no centralized learning. So there were pockets of learning happening all over the organization. There was sales training, there was product training, there was some technical training in some areas. Some of the HR business partners were doing some leader development, manager development, but there was no centralized connection. So I'm like 22 years old in Ken's office, like, I think we should do this, and this is how we could pull groups together. And Ken's like, do you want to run that? Do you want to do that? And so, of course, I'm like, yes. And I had no idea what I was doing. But, fortunately, he had the foresight. He had run like big enterprise HR operations for like Shell, Abbott Labs. So he had the foresight, like what he saw, like now, like looking back, and he's told me this, like here was this young woman with so much energy and so much enthusiasm. And he knew, like, I'm not going to have to help her with that. I'm just going to have to provide some steps and some structure and some guidance along the way. So that, like, for me, like, that's mentoring at its best. When I've got a ton of drive and ambition, but I don't know the how to, and I need someone that's had that experience that can help me fill in those gaps.
I love that story. One, I love that you were specific. You named the person. That's incredible. And the story of how it relates, because that's so true to a mentoring relationship. I mean, whenever we're in any form of mentoring relationship, so key is having that activation energy to actually go ahead and like do something about it. Because ultimately you can, it's okay if you make pivots, it's okay if you make iterations, it's okay if you make changes to where you thought you wanted to go, and then where it ended up maybe falling flat, but then you change it this way. As long as you got that like strong action step, that you make a really big move, your mentor can kind of help guide you. I had scoliosis as a kid, and it's kind of like I'm growing, and this back brace would help keep my back straight. So as long as I was growing, it would help me straighten. The moment I stopped growing, the moment the back brace couldn't help me. So I think that's a weird analogy, and just trying to say, like, as long as you as a person in a mentoring relationship are constantly growing and moving in a direction, your mentor can be that brace to help you keep on path.
The guardrails. The guardrails along the way. Well, and because, if I think about this as a specific example, Ken had experience after experience that he could rely on. So I did not have that. And so one of the things that I did pretty early on, so I said yes. So literally, I'd been at this organization right out of graduate school, 22 years old, and suddenly I was leading a global learning and performance improvement team because he enabled me to be successful. Like he was my soft place to fall. He would pull me in to present to our executive team. I had never done that before. But he always met with me before. Here's the things to think about. Here's the data that you want to focus on and highlight. Like, this is what the CFO is really going to want to hear. Like, I've never had those experiences. So it wasn't that he said, Andrea, here's the opportunity. Good luck. He said, Andrea, here's an opportunity. And then he's thinking in the back of his head, like, okay, this girl's never done this before, but she's got a ton of energy. so I can work with her. And
I love that.
I so
I think
appreciate
that's
that.
really cool. Did you know the type of opportunity he was giving you when you had it? Like, did you realize that like a
No,
lot of companies are like,
no.
this is our strict routine of how people progress in our company, and you know, wait your turn, and this is how it goes. Like, did you realize that this was a really cool opportunity he was giving you? And like,
No.
when did you fully appreciate it?
Oh gosh, probably 10 years later, probably after, because again, it was my first job right out of graduate school. My parents are school teachers. They're retired school teachers now, but I had very limited business context. And so I've always been very self-driven and taken a lot of initiative just naturally. That's my personality and my style. And so for me, it was just like the next thing that I was interested in. But the leadership, so really, I mean, a year and a half into corporate America, I'm leading a global team. So I was with that company for 8 years, traveled all over the world, just had incredible opportunities and experiences, all because of the opportunity that he really helped me step into.
That's cool. That's awesome. Why did you decide to invest in these mentor relationships? Like, I mean, ultimately, it's, back to the whole activation energy. You have to be willing to take the leap. And I know working with sometimes younger people or even sometimes older people, there's a lot of BS that goes on in our heads for
Yeah.
why we should or shouldn't act, or like, oh, I don't want to disturb this person. I don't want to mess with their psyche. What gave you the confidence and I guess, the forward thinking to think I'm going to be intentional about building mentor relationships?
Yeah, gosh, let me just process that for a second. I think about it a little bit differently. The relationships that have had the most impact on me have been more informal in nature. This one in particular, never did he say, I'm going to mentor you through this. He just did it. So it never felt forced. It never felt pressed on me. It felt like support and value add. And so he remains a mentor in my life, like still someone that as I'm struggling or moving, I remember several years ago, I was making, after Premier Farnell, I worked for a consulting firm doing leadership development and executive coaching for 10 years. And then in 2014, I left that gig and went back into big enterprise company at an executive level. And so that was a first for me, right? I'd never worked as an executive inside of an organization of that size. And so I called him up and said, you've done this a lot. Like, what should I be thinking about? So when you ask me, Garrett, like what's important for me or when have I been intentional? It's when I'm lacking experience in something. Like I'm never going to need someone to like give me a shot in the arm or to give me encouragement to like go do something. I need the playbook sometimes. I want to learn from your failures and your mishaps, and that's just priceless. If you can get those stories and those experiences. So that's when I have really sought mentors.
And give yourself credit, because that willingness to put yourself out there, be vulnerable and say, I don't know, is so important, because that is like the crux. Like that vulnerability is what builds trust. If you don't have vulnerability, you don't have trust, plain and simple. And I love that you were willing to continue going back to this person for guidance and wisdom because you wanted to grow as a person. And that makes so much sense. And so I would love to just transition to your advice, your tips, your guidance on people who are, maybe I'm a young person in my career, or maybe I'm a middle person in my career. Maybe I just transitioned to middle management. I was good as an individual sales contributor, but now I'm a sales manager. Holy smokes, this is a totally different world for me. What is your advice for people on seeking out mentors, making the most out of those mentors that they may already have in their life, but they may not fully realize?
Yeah, I think it's about asking questions. There's some people that I have mentored, and even some people that I'm not like formally mentoring, but that I just know that are so good at being curious. Early in my career, I was not good at that. I I really have always wanted to look good and appear as if I have it all together. Like one of the things I'm learning is like, you guys, you heard me say earlier, like I want the playbook. Like there's no playbook for life. Like nobody really knows what they're doing. Like we're all doing the best we can. I posted something today on my podcast about like we're all just bozos on the bus at the end of the day, full of mishaps and challenges. And so those emerging leaders who are humble enough to recognize that they don't have it all together, and so they just ask a ton of questions to try to learn from the experiences of others. I mean, that's my biggest advice, is just asking a lot of questions. And even being asked a question says so much for people. Like that thing that we often hear of, gosh, I'm afraid to reach out. I don't want to bother them. Or it's such a compliment when I get asked for guidance or advice. Like that's such a boost for me. And I love being able to share my experiences. It's really energy giving. So that would be another piece of advice I would give. Yeah, reframe that. Like instead of thinking that you're going to burden someone, think about it as life-giving.
Bingo. I think that's the big quote from Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. People love to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
People love to give back their own guidance and wisdom. I think you are spot on with that, Andrea. It makes me think, I want to think back to your mentor relationship with Ken, because I'm a big believer in horizontal mentorship, which just ultimately means two people being open to the idea of learning from each other. What are some of the things, like hindsight being 2020, putting the relationship, in the rear view mirror now, what were some of the things that you gave to Ken in that mentoring relationship?
Oh gosh, probably energy. I mean, he is such a servant leader. And so just him being able to come alongside me, I mean, me being so excited about what we were doing and so passionate, but we should ask him. Like at some point, Garrett, you should chat with him. Like I think that would be interesting, yeah, he's in the Chicagoland area, no doubt continuing to do what he does. I suspect there are a lot of people like me that would say that about him, because that's how he leads. And that has been huge encouragement for me. I mean, I suspect if you were to ask my team today, they would say, like, Andrea pours into us. She really loves us. She really cares about us. That's so important to me that they feel that.
I love it. I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think even from a maybe more like specifically tangible perspective, I'm even looking at it from the lens of, you gave him energy, yes. But I'm a big believer that mentors see something in you that maybe you don't see in yourself. So when you came to Ken and were like, I think we can do this, this, and this, and this, and bring everybody together. Like they're all siloed, like you had mentioned previously. Like, let's bring it all together. Let's make it all centralized. You had saw something in what he could be able to do with this whole department, with this whole HR component of what he's doing that maybe he didn't realize was possible. And you're like, we can do this. And you saw something that he didn't see. And then he saw something in you that you were the one that can lead this thing.
That's great. Yeah, no doubt part of that. So he was newer to the organization when I first approached him on this idea. So I suspect you're spot on there. He certainly had a vision, but probably not to that, because he was very high level. He was leading human resources for all of North America. So he had a really big scope. So you're right. I mean, it probably was like really exciting to him that here's a portion of the business that she can really help move forward.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I love that. I wanted to bring that part out and acknowledge that part, because just back to your whole point, don't be afraid to reach out. At the end of the day, you're providing much more value than you may realize. I think so often we get in our heads about what's on paper. We look at someone else's LinkedIn profile and they're like, oh my goodness, this person's so accomplished. They got all this accolades and all these amazing things that they've done. And we think to ourselves, I think of Wayne's World when they're like going up to Alice Cooper, they're like, we're not worthy.
We're not worthy.
Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, so that's it. We get in our heads that we're not worthy, but that's so not true. So I'd love to ask you, what is your advice for people? Let's say I'm an employee for a company, and yeah, right now we're in this crazy coronavirus period. or, we've got some crazy things going on. What are some things that I can do to, and I love the way that you put it, because it wasn't that you sought out him to be your formal mentor. You didn't say, hey, Ken, will you be my mentor? But that built over time. It just was a natural thing that had come about. What do you suggest that employees do when they're in a work environment to go about maybe starting these relationships, maybe not with an agenda that they will be your mentor, but that you would be open to the idea of that's how this relationship developed?
Yeah. And you could start with something as simple as a lunch meeting. Like we're both at home, working from home. Let's just connect via Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever it is, right? And just start a conversation. And like, I think a great question to ask people right now is like, what are you learning through this? What are some of your key takeaways? So just starting with some questions and starting the conversation and being open to where it goes. Have some questions that you're curious about and see where it goes.
I love that. I love that constant curiosity. I think that makes a ton of sense. And yeah, I guess what I'd love to learn, what is your thoughts on the people who object, to say things like, I don't have time for this. I'm doing all these other things. I don't have time to build these relationships. What is your thoughts of people who come back with that sort of objection?
Yeah, I think that's good. That'll catch up at some point. For me, it's all about the relationship. It's not about the problem we're trying to solve or the strategy. It's about the relationships at the end of the day. Like those are the things through my career that have given me an opportunity to have a career. I was in consulting for 10 years, and then I went inside of an organization and led HR for 3 years. And so now I'm back in the consulting world. And Garrett, it was so fascinating for me when I went back into consulting. So I'd been out of the game for a couple of years, but really how quickly those relationships emerged and the impact that I'd had on those organizations and those people previously, like that all so quickly came back. And so it was a huge testament to me 3 years ago when I came back into the consulting world of the power of relationships. So for me, it's how could you not have time for that? Like I'm such a visionary. Every Sunday I spend time like looking at my 10-year plan. And one of the things on my 10-year plan is that I'm focusing on key relationships that give me energy. So looking at that every week, then I'm really challenged to ask myself, okay, what are the relationships I'm pouring into this week? So that 10 years in the future, I've maintained those. I've nurtured those so that they're doing really well because of that time spent.
That's so fascinating. I love how intentional you are about that. It makes me think of a story. I'm a big fan of Tony Robbins. When I graduated from Indiana University, my parents got me a gift. That gift was to go to Unleash the Power Within by Tony Robbins. It was like a weekend thing. And one of the stories that he shared was he was talking about his son. And one of his son's friends, when they were like 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, his son had a best friend who just had the best laugh. I mean, this kid's laugh was infectious. Like when he laughed, it was the goofiest, loudest, most absurd laugh. Everybody started laughing, even if they didn't know what they were laughing about. When this kid laughed, everybody laughed. And what Tony said was, to his son, he's like, make sure this guy's in your life for the rest of your life. Like, he gives you energy. He gives everybody energy. Make sure you're around those people. And I thought that story really lined up very well with what you were saying about just being intentional about who's giving you energy versus who's taking your energy, and how are you spending your time, because that can catch up. Just like you had mentioned, like you might think, I'm too busy. I got all this crazy. I got things going around everywhere. I'm flying. I'm crazy. If you're not intentional about spending time with people that are giving you energy, you're going to be without energy. You're eventually going to be without it, and you eventually may be without a job, with or without your own control. So you might as well be taking time to foster these relationships for your own self, because you may not have anything to kind of fall back on if it's all just about the work itself.
Yeah, and it makes me think of the personal board of directors, the personal board of directors concept, that you have like different relationships with different people that are filling different needs in your life. So you know, my husband is such a good example of someone who's so affirming, but is also such a great challenger for me in my life. Like he's such a truth teller. He's always going to push me to be my best, to live with the utmost integrity. It's just the kind of person he is. I also have, I have associates and colleagues who I would consider mentors and coaches. And, we've not distinguished between those two. Like I talked about, for me, mentoring is about when haven't had the experience, right? And I want someone to tell me how to do it, to give me advice and guidance and counsel. But those people I will also call up and say, like, right now, like, I really don't want your advice. Like, I just want you to ask me some good questions, or I can tell there's an answer formulating within me. So ask me some good coaching questions to help me self-discover rather than telling me what to do.
That's the advice I find to be the most powerful in all mentoring relationships. Like when I'll do little mentor workshop videos and I'll meet with people, almost always it's about the power of questions. Like the reason why therapists can give therapy sessions to people with all different backgrounds and stories and notions and concepts and just areas of wherever is because they ask great questions. It's not that they needed to be an expert in your specific area to give you advice on how to handle this emotional thing that's going on in your world. They just asked great questions because you know what was realistic for you and you knew the answer to your own questions. And I think those questions are so powerful.
That's so good. Yeah, so good.
So, Andrea, we are at the end of this interview. This has been a fantastic
This was
time.
so much fun.
Yeah, I love learning your story. I'm really glad that you shared that. That was really cool. I loved learning the evolution of how that helped you get to where you're at today and how you still stay in touch and continue that relationship over time and your other mentor relationships. My final question is, how can our audience find you? How can our audience connect with you? How can they learn more about you, connect with HRD Advisory Group, or just connect with you, Andrea Butcher?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is probably the best way to do that. And you'll find there the podcast. We have a weekly show, Being at Work. So I would encourage you to subscribe and check that out. It's all about leadership lessons. So we highlight challenges that leaders have led through so that we can all learn from those things, because we know that being a leader is hard.
So true. That's awesome. Well, everybody, thank you all for being here watching this podcast. Andrea, thank you for being our guest. This was awesome. I really enjoyed your insight. I love learning your stories. And look forward to seeing you all at our next podcast. See everybody.
Great. Thanks, Garrett.